I'm going to go out on a limb and say you have never seen anything quite like the HiFi Rose RA180 integrated amplifier, but the real question is, does it sound as good as it looks? Before we jump into the video, I would like to thank today's sponsor, KRISTI'S. 60% of men will experience some form of hair loss before they're 35. That means that 2 out of 3 of you, yes, you watching this right now, are experiencing some form of hair loss. And I get it, because my hair started to thin in my late 20s and really started to go the way of the dodo by my mid-30s. But it wasn't too late, and I did something about it with KRISTI'S. I got the care I needed for my thinning hair without having to leave my home, visit a doctor, or even go to a pharmacy thanks to KRISTI'S subscription-based service. After more than a year, I think the results speak for themselves. I'm so grateful I found a plan that worked for me to reverse my thinning hair and even stimulate new hair growth, and I believe it can work for you too. Hair loss stops with KRISTI'S. Try it for yourself. To get 50% off your first order, go to KRISTI'S.com/Andrew Robinson or just click the link in the description. That's KRISTI'S.com/Andrew Robinson. Thank you again to KRISTI'S for sponsoring this video, and now back to it. The RA180 is, on its face, an old-school, all-mechanical, dare I say, steampunk-inspired integrated amplifier. While the Rose may look vintage, inside it boasts a more modern Class D amplifier that, depending on how you set it up, is good for up to 400 watts per channel. Now, HiFi Rose calls the 180 a Class AD design, but it really is a Class D amp with Class A or AB-like linearity. In other words, HiFi Rose will lead you to believe that it should sound more like a Class A or AB amp than a Class D one, but we're going to see about that. Unlike a lot of modern integrateds, the Rose is an all-analog affair. There are no built-in DACs or wireless audio tech. If you want to add digital connectivity, HiFi Rose is banking on you buying one of their streamers, like the RS150. Now, the amp has 3 unbalanced analog inputs, a balanced analog input, and a single subwoofer out, as well as a built-in phono preamp that can be switched between moving magnet and moving coil cartridges. And high-end vinyl enthusiasts will appreciate that its internal preamp goes way beyond most, providing manual EQ capability. You can select curves for your albums based on the record label's specifications. For example, I was able to adjust the Rose's internal phono preamp to match Columbia Records' recommended RIAA curve when listening to Miles Davis in person at the Blackhawk for an arguably more accurate presentation. The adjustments are subtle, but they are noticeable. The only other integrated that I have come across that does this is the Technics R1000, though it tackles these types of adjustments in the digital realm, which may or may not upset some purists. Setup is very straightforward, even if the front looks a bit complicated. The biggest decision listeners will have to make initially is whether or not to run the amp in its standard or bridged mode. Out of the box, the Rose is configured to produce 200 watts per channel across 4 channels. 4 channels that are capable of driving 2 different pairs of loudspeakers. Now, in bridged mode, the 4 channels are combined into 2 that produce 400 watts. And I personally preferred the bridge or BTL mode, because it's here that I felt HiFi Rose's claims of Class AB-like sound were more realized. Out of the box, the sound was more sterile, less dynamic, and, well, more Class D sounding. Regardless of the configuration, the Rose gives you the power to drive most any loudspeaker on the market, and we used it extensively with the Wharfedale Elysian 4 towers, Sonus Faber's Lumina 3 and 5 tower speakers, as well as our Klipsch Cornwall 4s. Now, the Wharfedale and Sonus Faber speakers were the better overall pairings, with the Cornwalls and their heightened sensitivity revealing a less than, well, completely silent noise floor from the amplifier, and it produced audible hiss from both the tweeter and mid-range horns. Another cool feature with the Rose is you can turn off functions that you don't deem necessary for better performance. For example, when listening to records, I was able to disable the built-in phono preamp. I could also defeat the unit's tone controls and bass management options for the cleanest possible signal path, which is a nice touch, though doing this did not completely rid the amp of its hiss when connected to our Klipsch speakers. Speaking of control, while the physical design of the amp may urge consumers to really reach out and touch it, the amp does come with a very small remote, giving you power, volume, and input selection. No matter if you use the remote or make adjustments manually, you get to see and hear the Rose's mechanical movements in action. And while nothing happens on the Rose instantaneously, every command, be it remote or physical, is going to be followed by a very satisfying click, thunk or whirring sound. I found it endearing, though Kristi tired of it rather quickly. And moving our focus to sound, in its bridge mode, the Rose is incredibly linear, with no one aspect of the signal's frequency response outshining the next. I want to call the Rose transparent to the source in that it seems to do little to alter the sound of what's feeding it, but depending on your speakers, you may take issue with my use of the word transparent due to the amp not being dead silent with respect to its noise floor. Subtle noise aside, this is not an amp that possesses any sort of real outright character. However, when compared to true Class AB amps like Rotel's Michi X3, the Rose is a bit less weighty in the bass. And I attribute the Michi's sense of added weight to either the X3's preamp or the amplifier's ability to extract just greater control over the speaker's woofers, because neither amp produced measurable differences in any of the connected speakers' frequency response. So in other words, neither amp added or subtracted bass, but there's just seemed to be this very subtle softening or roll-off of low bass notes with the Rose compared to the X3. Now, in terms of detail, texture, and speed, these two amps, they're neck and neck, with perhaps the Rose very subtle bass roll-off helping to give it this feeling of added quickness, which for drum solos, like the one found within Tool's The Pot, was awesome, even when played back at concert-like volumes. The Rose's mid-range and treble performance is about as uncolored as they come, and in many ways reminded me a lot of another great Class D type amp, the NAD M33. Now, before some of you start shouting,
"Yeah, but you didn't like the M33.
Understand that it is possible for me to ultimately not prefer something while still recognizing that it's pretty damn awesome, which was the case with the M33. That amp was arguably perfect, and I feel largely the same about the Rose. With the Rose, I was hearing the voicing of the speaker and nothing else. Though with some higher frequencies similar to its bass performance, the Rose was just a hair softer or rolled off compared to the X3, which some of you may prefer. When it comes to soundstage and dynamics, the Rose is solid. The soundstage is incredibly detailed and very well appointed, though in our space and with the Wharfedale and Sonus Faber speakers, it seemed to favor width over depth. Separation between instruments was impressive, as was movement within the stage itself, as evident in the song Seville off the MI2 soundtrack. Now, dynamics were impressive, though the subtle roll-off top and bottom cost the Rose some, emphasis on some, outright snap. Sonic shifts and swings were sure-footed, and at higher volumes, certain notes like the snare hits at the beginning of Ant's marching didn't have the same raw attack of the X3. But again, we are talking about differences in degrees of excellence here. But to bring back a little bit of that bass, I connected it to our SVS 3000 Micro when testing it with the Lumina 3 towers. Using the active crossover in conjunction with SVS's internal EQ capability, the integration with the Rose was near perfect, solving any and all concerns I may have had with its very mild low-end roll-off in the process. I honestly don't have many concerns with the Rose's day-to-day livability, though for a Class D amp, it may surprise some of you to hear that it runs a bit warm. I know it surprised the hell out of me. So I would be very wary about placing any equipment directly on top of the vents. Also, when making volume adjustments via the remote, because the volume is adjusted using a series of gears, small incremental increases in level aren't the easiest to pull off. And lastly, if you want to run the Rose as a strict stereo amplifier, you can. Just know that there's a bit of a procedure involved to do so, and it's not exactly intuitive. But honestly, if you're shopping for a strict stereo amplifier, I really don't see the point in looking at an integrated like the 180 here. Now, when looking at comparable amplifiers, the equally powerful and similarly priced Michi X3, I prefer the sound of the X3 overall, though I wish it had the Rose's build quality and phono stage because I consider both of those to be superior. While the Rose may rank among the better Class D based amps on the market today, there is just no getting around the genuine article, and for me, the X3 is that. The McIntosh 7200 is another amp, receiver, that came to mind when evaluating the Rose. At $8,000, the 7200 is more expensive by about $1,000, though you do get more features. Like with the X3, I prefer the Max True Class AB topology to that of the HiFi Rose, though I prefer the smaller stature and industrial design of the Rose to that of the McIntosh. Compared to the costlier Technics R1000, here's where I feel things get interesting. I love the R1000, and in a lot of ways, there are aspects of the HiFi Rose that remind me of the Technics. The R1000 retains more of that low-end presence, not unlike the X3, but from the mid-range on up, these two amps are neck and neck. If you've been eyeing the R1000 but found it to be a little bit too cost-prohibitive, do yourself a favor and check out the Rose, especially if you're serious about vinyl playback. Let's not kid ourselves. HiFi Rose made the RA180 for one reason and one reason alone, to attract attention. Because as soon as you see it, it pulls you in and makes you want to listen. The icing on the cake might just be that when you hit play or lower the needle on your favorite record, the Rose sounds damn good. I have never wanted to display a product more proudly nor ditch a remote in favor of making manual adjustments on the unit itself than I have with the RA180. It is a great integrated amplifier, one that analog purists and vinyl enthusiasts will no doubt hold in high regard, though I cannot help but wonder how much better it would have been had HiFi Rose opted to lean all the way into its mechanical DNA and just put an old school Class AB amp inside rather than a state-of-the-art Class D one. So that is now my take on HiFi Rose's brand new integrated amplifier, but now it's time to find out what Kristi thought of this thing.
Well, I think it's pretty difficult to think of a product that is more unique than the Rose. I mean, pushing the boundaries of design is something that you and I talk a lot about on this channel. You know, we are always asking companies to think outside of that proverbial black box, and the HiFi Rose has really come through here.
Yeah.
It is beautiful, and I absolutely appreciate the thoughtfulness that went into this product's design.
Absolutely. I have never seen anything like it. And I know whenever we've done like our vintage reviews, I always kind of make a big deal about how when you interact with a vintage piece, like it feels mechanical, it feels handmade. And a lot of products nowadays don't have that. HiFi Rose does.
One of the coolest things to me was when you use the remote was watching, like as you adjust the volume, like watching that big dial spin was so cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it's maybe that's meaningless to somebody, but I just really appreciated just the attention to detail that is so clear that they put into this. Setting aside the art-like quality of this piece. The thing that I really am struggling to understand, and you touched on this, especially at the end of the review, was the decision to go Class D, especially at this price point. Ultimately, I think that is going to be the biggest hurdle for this amp, because we're talking about serious money here.
Yeah.
And I just don't typically associate Class D with anything costing close to $7,000. I mean, look, I get it. I get it that the Technics R1000 at $10,000 uses Class D, but you know what? They're Technics. They're a brand with a really long history, a cult-like following, and somehow Technics manages to not sound like Class D. I mean, at least that's in my opinion, and I can't quite say the same for the Rose.
Yeah, well, another thing about the R1000 is it's more than an amplifier. You know what I mean? It has DACs built into it. Yes, it is more expensive, but in the R1000's case, like having a type or variation of Class D amplifier kind of makes sense, because everything that gets, I'll call it, connected to the R1000 gets transformed into the quote-unquote digital realm. When it comes to newfangled topologies, the R1000 is beyond impressive and has managed to sound so much like a traditional AB or maybe even Class A amplifier that, yeah, the Rose in some respects is similar, but not exactly. I think given, like I say in the review, I think just given the mechanical nature of this amplifier, had it been like a 30 to 50 watt Class A amp, I have a feeling I don't know if it would necessarily sound better, but I think it would complete the package. You know what I mean?
Oh, I absolutely agree. I mean, if I had been sitting in the room at HiFi Rose, like during development, I would have either suggested that they enter the market at a lower price or simply just come out swinging with Class AB design and force every brand out there to take notice.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm at. I think it's a very, very cool piece, and I do like it. I think it sounds good. I just personally prefer the Class A or Class AB sound of amplifiers, and that would probably lead me to look elsewhere.
Yeah.
You talked briefly about the HiFi Rose streamer, which I think is a really, really cool piece.
Yeah.
And I know you're spoiler alert, you love it.
The review's coming, yeah.
So when you talked about how you believe that obviously HiFi Rose is hoping you're going to buy this amp and then pair it with the streamer.
Yeah.
Which then puts you into the Technics R1000 price point.
It puts you literally neck and neck with the R1000. And if you were to buy the pair, in my opinion, now you're starting to talk about performance that is on par and in many ways now superior to the R1000.
I don't know if I agree 100%. I mean, I love the streaming aspect of the, what is it, the 150?
The 150, yeah.
I prefer the sound of the Technics. So I would probably get, at that price point, when you're looking at spending roughly like $10,000, I'm probably getting the R1000.
See, for me, and I don't want to spoil the streamer review.
Well, don't worry about it. Most people don't make it this long anyway.
No, you guys watch. The thing about the streamer is as we've talked about in some other reviews that you've seen recently, it is a very capable preamp. And so if I'm HiFi Rose, I think the very next product they need to make is a dedicated stereo amplifier. And even if they want to use this Class D or what they're calling an AED amp, and just put it in a stylish chassis, obviously with a few less bells and whistles and, volume controls and whatnot, keep the meters, so that they have a stereo companion for people that want to use the streamer as a preamp and streamer and DAC and. Because if they do that, I think they could bring the price down on the package, as well as have it make more sense for users who may look at the 180 and go, well, that's going to now give me a lot of functionality I'm not going to use because I can use it in the streamer, and vice versa. That's what I think is missing here. But I'm not surprised that you feel the way that you do about the integrated, because I have a feeling there's going to be a portion of the community that feels the same way. Given its price, Class D or Class AD, maybe it doesn't do enough beyond just having the crazy ass cool factor.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm putting on my mind reading hat,
oh boy,
that is going to be what I think the big pushback is going to be when we start seeing people roll in with comments.
Yeah,
it'd be like Class D, and for $7,000, it makes me scratch my head too, because you look at the Rose and it's like, they clearly give a shit.
Yeah.
Okay, they care about what the kind of product they're putting out.
Yeah.
In fact, like you said, I would rather have less power, but in a Class A or Class AB topology than 200 or 400 watts of whatever it is they're giving you.
Yep, I agree. I'm glad they didn't make a tube amp, but yeah, had this thing just been about 50 to 100 watts of Class A or dual mono style Class AB, knock me over with a feather.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that will be the next thing
maybe they'll make
tackle.
They'll make a 150 instead of a 180. Who knows?
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is now our review of the HiFi Rose RA180 integrated amplifier. What did you guys think? My question of the day is pretty simple, and that is, how badass do you think this integrated looks? Because I've never seen anything like it, and so I need some of you guys to go in the way back machine and tell me if you've seen anything like it, because I think it's one of a kind. Anyway, if you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. Go ahead and ring that bell so that you're notified when new videos come out. If you use any of the links that Kristi left for you down below, or you leave us a thanks, or you become a member of this channel, know that all of those are great ways that you have shown your support for this channel and the work that we do here, and we thank you all very much for doing that. Speaking of thanks, thank you to Keeps for sponsoring this episode. Again, to get 50% off your first order, go to keeps.com/Andrew Robinson. Thank you again to Keeps. And remember, follow me on Instagram at Recovering Audiophile, and that is it for us today. So remember, the only person who has to like the sound of your system is you. So happy listening, everybody. Thank you so much for watching, and we're going to see you on the next video. Bye.